Welcome to the Conflict Show. This is episode 9, and I'm the host, Kyle Anselone. Typically, I'm joined by the other co host, Will Porter, but he's taken out by some tech issues. So I am flying solo on today's show. We had talked about, and there's a lot of stuff we really wanted to cover. I'm going to do the best I can to do that by myself, although I did have the show prepped for Will here. So if I miss anything, sure when we're back together on Sunday, he will definitely catch up on any details I miss out on. But I think I got everything here and ready to go. Just make sure everybody is checking out the YouTube channel, Conflicts of Interest, and then find different social media platforms. Follow the show on Facebook and on Twitter. We are at con_interest. Then you also subscribe to podcast feeds. That way you get all the shows right somewhere downloaded. All right, first story we have today starts with this report from Politico, and as Dave DeCamp describes, is dubiously sourced, very thinly sourced, I believe just two. And one of those sources was actually not a direct source, but just somebody familiar with the matter. So, what that Politico story argues that there was an Iranian plot to kill the U.S. ambassador in South Africa. It was pretty transparent from reading the story that they didn't have a whole lot to go on, and that most of the political article was just bad story and not real details what the alleged plot was or anything like that. Trump tweeted about this, threatening the Iranians, and it comes out in a day or so. We have then this written up by Dave DeCamp, and it says South African intel source denies report of Iranian plot to kill U.S. ambassador. And so, what we essentially have now from the South African intelligence is them coming out and saying, we have no evidence that this was ever going to take place. So, that really suggests to me that they don't maybe have the evidence to like disprove the negative, that the Iranians definitely aren't carrying out this plot, but they don't seem to have any patient for it whatsoever. And so, I think should interpret this as likely just another one of those stories that we've been hammered with so many times over really a whole lot, but especially the Trump administration, which thinly sourced, gets big headlines, but ultimately turns out to be bunk. And this definitely is the case. I think there's a couple other things to mention here. First off, that the ambassador to South Africa is not a high profile person. I guess the person does have a relationship with Trump, but it isn't, let's say, somebody with the recognition of a David Petraeus, who, maybe when he was the commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, could maybe slightly be compared to the Qasem Soleimani, who Iran was going to assassinate this official for, is, I guess, the allegation. Of course, Qasem Soleimani was leader of the Iranian Quds Force, probably the second or third most popular figure in Iran. His funeral drew millions and millions of people, and assassinated by a U.S. drone strike right at the start of the year. Of course, immediately the Iranians responded by signaling, but nonetheless carrying out a big missile barrage attack against Iranian bases that house U.S. forces. Of course, because they signal attack, the only injuries caused by that barrage was people who were, some sort of concussion injury or something like that. So anyways, leading up, they now say, this is the Iranian response. Well, it doesn't make sense, I think, for a lot of reasons to put this person in response. Although I'm not sure there's any kind of direct correlation. I mean, you know, maybe if Mattis was still the Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense, even like SECOM General Kenneth McKenzie, they don't carry the recognition that Soleimani did, the importance, and so I'm not sure that would be a sufficient target for Iran to go after. There's also, what I talked about in the last episodes of Policy Focus, and then I think we mentioned it at least once on the first episode, Conflicts of Interest, which is that Iran is now kind of in this period of where they've kind of decided that they want to wait and see what the elections November election are. The way they've kind of currently positioned themselves, they haven't broken the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. They haven't gotten out of it. They have withdrawn from some of their commitments to that deal, but that is allowed under the deal if other countries leave and it sanctions with the U.S. has. And so Iran is still technically abiding by that deal and has signaled that should there be a president of the United States who says we will get back in the deal, the Iranians would be willing to negotiate going about that. They might ask for some compensation or something like that, or some additional kind of sanctions relief or something, because this has been really harmful. Trump's maximum pressure campaign to the Iranian economy. So maybe they want a little bit of leverage, but it's possible that they get back in the JCPOA, especially if Biden gets elected. Now, if Trump gets elected in November, then the Iranians have to realize that 4 years of strategic patience and being subject to the U.S. maximum pressure campaign probably isn't going to work so well, and they're going to have to figure out other things to do. And so I'm not sure why the Iranians rate that at this point. They've actually had some success in recent months, like shipping different kind of and parts for the petroleum industry to Venezuela. And so I'm not sure why they would feel to take this now. And obviously, there's no sourcing for political. It's just this very kind of surface level couple paragraphs about this vague plot. So I think that's about all I have for that story this morning. Um, Again, if Will has something else, I'm sure he'll come back and let us know. But with that, have this other one that I think is very important to talk about. It's again a sensational story again coming from the Bob Woodward book. So a few, but this is one interesting one. As in 2017, apparently Donald Trump really wanted to assassinate Bashar al-Assad after the alleged chemical weapons attack. I believe this one at Khan Sheikhoun. I'm going to link to an episode in the show notes page of me and Will Porter debunking the alleged chemical weapons attack there. But just for kind of a brief overview, April of 2017, right at the beginning of the month, you actually have members of the Trump administration, officials of the Trump administration, talking about relation or not normalizing relations, but essentially, being done with this hostile policy that they have directed towards Assad and understanding that, he is going to be the victor of this war and that the main enemy is the Islamic State. And so, the goal should be just defeating the Islamic State. And that means, not sanctioning and trying to kill Assad, then that seems like a good thing. Then there is this allegation of chemical weapons attack at Khan Sheikh. Now, on the show, if you listen to it, well, we break down the numerous problems with the reporting on this from the OPCW, including the fact that alleged victims of this attack showed up at the hospital before the alleged attack took place. The fact that the Russians telegraphed this as being just a regular strike against Al Qaeda leadership, and that there was this bunker that was filled with fertilizer and different chemicals, stuff like that, that was actually bombed that could have created some kind of gas. There's also the analysis that Timothy Postal, who is a big professor over at MIT, has done, like directions that explains why this attack wouldn't happen the way the OW, those who are looking to overthrow Assad, alleged. So ultimately, obviously, that they don't go forward with the assassination plot and instead end up firing 59 cruise missiles at Syrian government targets. I believe most of those missiles don't even hit their targets and end up being duds or land short. And ultimately, the few sites that were actually hitting that attack end up being repaired quickly. So, it seems like Donald Trump was certainly talked off whatever alleged that he was on that night when he wanted to actually carry out this very significant attack against Assad. Obviously, this would have been a disaster to carry out this attack. As I mentioned, Assad is the enemy of ISIS in Syria, and so Assad being there in power to combat the Islamic State was something that actually was, beneficial for defeating it and keeping the Islamic State as well as the other jihadist groups carry it down. And the more the U.S. has carried out these kind of strikes and attacks against Assad, the more it's helped the state. Uh, just real quick, my apologies that there's a lot of pauses in the article. I'm the OBS stuff as well. The first time of doing a solo show, so there's a little bit going on. So sometimes I gotta pause and make sure I'm clicking the right thing. But hopefully I'm keeping up with it pretty well for everyone. The next story I have here is from a New York Times report and written up by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The U.S. wants to expand the drone war into Kenya. Dave writes, a report from the New York Times says that authorities carry out drone strikes in Kenya to tap members of Al Shabaab, militant group that the U.S. is heavily bombing in neighboring Somalia. The drone war against Al Shabaab in Somalia has dramatically increased under President Trump, who loosened the engagement for the campaign in 2017. Honestly, under the Trump administration, we don't have a good idea of how much we've been bombing Somalia. We really the reporting that comes out of AFRICOM, which is the U.S. branch of the military that kind of dreads that warfare, and then there's also potentially CIA bombing of Al Shabaab in Somalia, and so occasionally there are journalists who file FOIAs or ask AFRICOM, "Hey, did you carry out an airstrike on this day?" And then they'll admit to it, but it's not like they put out every airstrike. The other problem is they always report they're killing militants, but rarely is it the case that they're killing militants. A lot of times, it's that there's any journalist who's able to go visit the site, talk to the people there, talk to the relatives that were killed. It turns out to be that the relatives say we're not Al Shabaab, and then if you look at kind of the demographic information, young kids, old men, stuff like that, these aren't Al Shabaab militants running around, shooting up international. Um, the report only cites anonymous sources for times, but it does cite four, and this is the kind of thing that even if it's not a something that's like moving forward and about to happen, it could be a trial balloon where they're kind of floating it and see what happens. Um, one of the reasons my guess is for this that has to do with Al Shabaab's attack on Camp Simba, which is a US military base in Kenya. I believe 3 Americans were killed in that attack. Essentially, they just kind of walked onto the base and attacked some US aircraft and ended up killing people. And so, it was really just poor defense on our part that these soldiers were put in a position that they were killed, but nonetheless, they now want to extend the drone war country. My guess is the problem is it won't just be limited to Al Shabaab and will expand to different groups, just like all the airstrikes and drone strikes in Somalia have now extended and also target the Islamic State affiliate there. So obviously, we don't want this drone war expanding. That's a lot of bad news, and my hope is that hear about this, maybe Congress could take some action and say we're not going to allow it. All right, the last thing I got on today's show is a story published in RT, actually by Will. So fortunately, he's not here and will likely have stuff to add on this on the next show. But he writes, Pentagon Papers leaker Daniel Ellsberg testifies in Assange defense, says WikiLeaks exposed war crimes in public interest. So very important stuff that Will has written up here, because Ellsberg, is the famed whistleblower of the Pentagon Papers that exposed the legal U.S. bombing during the Vietnam War. This is kind of the standard of whistleblowing, and so for him to go the trial and defend Assange and make a couple of important points, like Assange cannot get a fair trial for what he has done under these charges in the United States. you know, they like to pretend in the UK court that Assange is going to get a fair trial, but that's not going to happen. He's likely going to have a jury not of his peers. Hell, those would, I guess, be Australians. He's not even an American, but it's not going to be a pool that might include journalists, people within the national security or the American deep state. their spouses, their friends, that they're likely to be a part of this jury pool for Assange in the Eastern Federal Virginia District. If Assange can't get a fair trial, then the UK is, by their law, not supposed to extradite him. So this is, a very important point to make. Although I think, it's going to kind of land on deaf ears with the judge. It may make the point to some people who regard Daniel Ellsberg as, a heroic and important figure. The other point that Will highlights here is the American public needed urgently to know what was being done routinely in their name, and there was no other way for them to learn than by unauthorized disclosure. And so, again, the point here from Ellsberg is that it was essential the American people need to know, and we know that because, as me and Will talked about on recent shows, 9/11 shows us that if we are killing people around the world committing war crimes, people are going to come here and attack American civilians just like we attack civilians overseas, right? And so we need to know what's going on overseas so we can understand, when and if people are coming over here trying to attack us, and if we maybe don't want to attack people because we don't want them to come over here and attack us. The other important point here is that there was no other way for people to learn that information, and that's clearly the case because the main thing Assange is being targeted for is the Chelsea Manning leaks, which came out in 2010, and exposed the Afghan and Iraq warlords, Guantanamo files, and State Department cables that had huge impacts all over the world. So it really was something that needed to come out. Chelsea Manning had actually shopped this to other outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they refused to run it. And so obviously there was a real need for this to be published, and fortunately Chelsea Manning did get to Julian Assange and published it for us all to see. It didn't have all the consequences of with ending the wars and bringing our troops home and stuff like that, but certainly it was hugely important information. And I think that's about all I have for the show today. So I will wrap it there. Everybody, make sure you're checking out all the great stuff that me and Will are doing with the show. We have the YouTube channel where we're sharing the uh, articles of what we're talking about. And we got this great news sticker on the bottom of the screen. Um, so you share the show from there. We also produce clips of each episode that you could share out. So if you just want to, share out the Assange update for the day or whatever, you could easily do that. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcatcher if possible. Rating and review. Got a bunch of really nice reviews on iTunes. I really do appreciate that. From looking at what Libsyn and YouTube are telling me, the show is doing great and people are sharing it. Just make sure if you're listening to the show, you're now already subscribed to the channel, and we'll be back with a new